we want to reiterate our demand that the Liberals fix the checks. They expand it to include seniors, people living with disabilities. We need to see real relief for Canadians.
The NDP leader is giving Canadians whiplash with his latest flip-flop and the flop on the flip.
So to see the NDP, which was supposedly the party of workers, turn its back on hardworking Canadians and say, no, we shouldn't be delivering this check unless we expand it massively, is not recognizing working Canadians for the challenges they're facing.
After a week of procedural wrangling, the Liberals' 2-month GST holiday passed through the House of Commons with the help of the NDP, and the bill is off to the Senate.
Je déclare la motion adoptée.
But the other half of the Fed's package, the $250 rebate checks they hope to send out in the spring, are on the back burner after the Liberals carved them out of the bill. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh this week said he'd vote against the checks if the Liberals didn't offer to send them to seniors, students, and people with disabilities. The Scrum is here to talk about vibe session politics. Nojoud Al Mallees is a reporter with the Canadian Press. Robert Fife is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail, and Nik Nanos is the chief data scientist and founder of Nanos Research. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I say it with a smile, Nick, but vibe session is the word that Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland used to describe the motivation behind what they're doing, right? That the economy at a macro level is still doing okay, but that people are not feeling that at sort of their own personal level. What do you think about the effectiveness of what they're doing?
Well, I don't think it's effective at all. How's that? And you know, the vibe session is real. What we've seen in the weekly tracking on consumer confidence is since Donald Trump was elected, and especially since he did his, are we going to call it the tariff tweet?
Yeah.
That consumer confidence in Canada has basically gone into the bucket. I didn't want to use the other word. Anyways, so there has been a decline, and we really have to worry about that. But you know, the reality is that you know the Liberals are trailing the Conservatives by 18 points. Like if they think a tax holiday for 60 days is going to make a material difference in how people feel about the Liberals, I think they're sadly mistaken. And people will see this as a ploy for a government that looks like it's on its last legs trying to hold on to power.
My guess is, and certainly from my conversations, Bob, I'm not sure they think that this and this alone is all of a sudden going to close that very substantial gap that Nick points out, but that perhaps it will lay the groundwork for something that might work in the future. And the idea is to sort of show the empathy that they've been criticized for lacking for people who generally are working but feel like they are still not doing well.
Well, good luck, because it's not going to work. I mean, this is...
What do you guys really think? No,
this is a gimmick for a government facing a voter deficit and who don't care at all about the fiscal deficit. And you know, if this government really cared about the people who are hurting in the society, and that's poorer people, we have a great program called the GST rebate program, which goes out quarterly, and it helps people who are really having difficulty making ends meet. They could have increased the GST for those people, but this is, you know, for Christmas trees, come on, for toys, come on. I mean, this is such a desperate ploy by a government in such serious trouble. And I think people will say, okay, I'll take the money, but they're not going to get any benefit out of this one. And then they blew the whole thing with the $250 one, which goodness knows if that's ever going to actually see the light of day now.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a second. I think again, the Liberals are trying. I mean, the pivot is one that's being done on purpose, right? Because the GST rebate, for example, that Bob talks about, that is much more targeted and aimed at people who are truly, like really suffering in society. They have doubled, I think twice, right? And they insisted at the time, and you'll be familiar with this as someone who covers fiscal policy, this is what we're going to do now because it's targeted and it won't be inflationary, right? It helps the people who really need it. This is the opposite end of that, right? It's broad-based, the GST cut, but the checks would even be more so, and the NDP is pushing for them to apply to even more people. Do you think that's going to happen?
On the checks?
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, fiscal policy fundamentally, I know economists want to think of it as like, oh, economic policy, but it's politics, right? And the government is doing something that's a bit off-brand for itself because it's kind of delivering something to essentially everybody instead of targeting it. But the justification is, we did a lot for people who are on the lower end of the income spectrum. We did a lot for seniors. We've given help for students, and now it's everybody else's turn. And that's really just in response to the fact that, you know, people who are working who maybe don't necessarily receive the Canada Child benefit or got the boost for OAS are like, what about me? Like, my costs went up. What are you even doing for me? And so there are some valid economic critiques on this policy, but fundamentally, when you're in this position, it's become unsustainable for the government to turn to Canadians and say, well, you know what, inflation's at 2%, everything's fine, and let's move on. People don't feel like they're fine, and so the government chose the populist track to respond to that.
How wide is that group, Nik, of people who, let's say, are making 120 grand a year? Because I think on the face of it, we hear that now. Like, the fact that these checks were supposed to be for people who make up to $150,000 in 2023, it catches a lot of us off guard. Like, that used to be a ton of money. You used to be a fairly wealthy person if you could earn $149,000 a year. But the fact that they are identifying that group as feeling particularly like the economy is not working for them, how real is that?
I think that's straight up politics, Vashi, because those are the voters that they need, kind of middle class families who are feeling the pinch. You know, the reality is that, you know, the median income is not $100,000. It's much less than that when we look at the median income of Canadians. And I don't know how a self-described progressive government justifies giving people who are making $100,000 to $150,000 the $250 check, which won't mean anything to them, and then to not have something for Canadians who are unemployed or who are on poverty and stuff like that. So this is straight up sad, crass, and epically bad politics.
Didn't they have to, I mean, it may be described that way by Nik, but didn't they have to do something substantial, Bob, in order to, like, if they just give up, like, I get it, they're way far behind, but is there something else?
But this hasn't even been thought out. I mean, they haven't even talked to retailers. On the GST, retailers are saying, we can't figure this out. This is causing a lot of headaches and confusion for us. But then when you try to give taxpayers who make $150,000, $250, I mean, my chiropractor said, I've got 2 receptionists who are struggling to make ends meet. One of them had a problem with her car, and now how does she go? She could use that $250. The chiropractor and his wife are doing just fine. They don't want that. They'd rather give that money to people who need it. But this is not why they're doing it. They're not doing it because they care about poor people or people who are suffering. They're trying to go after, as Nik says, a voting bloc who are making $150,000 a year, and it's just bad politics. And it's because I don't think the people who are even getting it are going to say, I don't need this sort of stuff, and it's bad for the economy.
Well, I think
it's inflationary.
I mean, that's the Conservatives' critique as well, right? That essentially they're not. It's a trick. It's inflationary. They're not going to vote for it. My sense is the Liberals hope that they're wedging the Conservatives on this, that they're kind of putting them in a bind, Nojoud, insofar as they've talked so much about affordability as a challenge and the relief that they would like to see provided, that it's difficult for them to then square that they wouldn't support this kind of relief. Do you think it is?
I think it is a bit tricky for Pierre Poilievre because we've heard him for the last year or 2 years talk about, Justin Trudeau's inflationary taxes, and then now he comes out and says, well, this tax cut is inflationary. And yes, in theory, it would, it would increase spending and affect prices. But, from the economists I've spoken to, the amount is so small that it's not expected to actually show up in the data. But, as Pierre Poilievre takes more positions on policies, he then has to give a coherent vision for his economic policies, for the agenda the Conservative government will have. And, for someone who was railing a lot about the carbon tax and other things about cost of living, and now taking this position, the Liberals and NDP are jumping at it as an opportunity to essentially say, which is it? Do you love taxes, or is it just you don't love the ones that you don't propose, or tax cuts?
Yeah, I have like 2 seconds, go for it. I feel like you're unconvinced.
I think they've done damage to themselves. Yeah. It would have been better for them to do nothing and perhaps come forward with a vision for jobs, prosperity, competitiveness, and how we're going to be productive.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. I'm out of time, sadly. Thank you for all your time. I appreciate it. Nojoud Al Mallees, Bob Fife, and Nik Nanos.